Hi, everybody. How are you this morning? This is the most exciting tech conference because we are up on time. For us, most of us techies, we work late into the night. So getting somewhere by 8 a.m. is a struggle. But this was amazing to see everybody gathered here. And I missed the memo to wear blue, so I guess I'll just stand out. Joined by a very, very exciting panel. We're going to demystify the AI hype and talk about, first there was a hype, and then everybody jumped on Gen AI, but beyond generative AI, there's so much more that's going on in the AI world. And our panel will take on a host of questions, focusing first on agentic AI, looking at how AI now is being prepared to solve problems that are everyday, that are pre-programmed. And they'll give us like deep insights of where they see people can return the ROI, because a lot of money is going in. But beyond a lot of money going in, I think some of the executives in the boardrooms are getting frustrated by how long it's taking to go live, right? How long it's taking for them to start seeing revenues coming in. So we're hoping that in this discussion, we shall unpack some of those issues. My first question is rather more broad, and just looking at any of the panelists, agentic AI is gaining traction. What are some of the opportunities we should anticipate in the various sectors? And because we're in Africa, particularly in Africa, maybe I can throw this to Eric to start. Yeah.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you, and thank you, Ashley, and the Kala team, and Tom Bruno for organizing this. I think I was chatting with Tom Bruno a few months ago, and to see this come to reality is the dream come true. Well done. So, I mean, she asked about agentic AI, but I don't want to assume everybody knows what that is.
So you can start with a definition.
Okay, so I'll try and define it. So over the last 2-3 years since ChatGPT came onto the scene in November of 2022, there's been a lot of attention to large language models and Gen AI in general, which, as the word says, Gen is all about generating mostly text. That's why they're called large language models. And it looks like there's a trajectory from generative AI, and the next big thing now is agentic AI. And the way I would try and differentiate Gen AI from agentic AI is, whereas generative AI, for example, generates an answer for you on ChatGPT or Gemini or Lambda using a prompt, a question that you ask it, agentic AI goes beyond that, way beyond that, and does actions. So it doesn't just answer questions, but it actually carries out a task, completes a process. So for example, you might go on Gemini or ChatGPT and ask, how should I spend 1 week of Christmas holiday in Naivasha? And GPT will tell you, you could go to this lodge, you could go to Hell's Gate, and this is how you spend 1 week in Naivasha, right? So that's Gen AI. Agentic AI, on the other hand, you could ask agentic AI to book for me a 1 week holiday in Naivasha. And agentic AI will deploy a bunch of tasks, one of which will be look up the hotels, right? Match them to my needs. For example, my income profile, my interest, and then it will go ahead and go on booking.com or Airbnb. It will actually book the hotel for you, maybe find the cheapest one, make those reservations, send you the reservation, get you a transportation. So in this sense, it's performing multiple tasks to accomplish a much bigger range of duties than basic question response. So in other words, agentic AI, beyond just answering questions, number one, it's perceiving, by learning from its environment. It's acting, and that's the key difference as opposed to Gen AI. It's reasoning, and it's learning over time. So for example, through multiple steps of you interacting with it, it can learn that your interests are not really like hiking, So it will not take you to Hell's Gate. It's more swimming, so it'll take you to the Olkaria, geothermal hot springs. So that's the difference between Gen AI and agentic AI. But, so back to unless my panelists want to add anything to that.
That's good.
Prince had something to add, I guess, and then. Yeah.
And then we can go to us.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I just wanted to add on, that was a great breakdown of how agentic AI operates. And I just wanted to reiterate the points of AI agents acting off of executions via APIs or different tools, right? From suggestions from a variety or one singular large language model. And I kind of want to break this down in context because I was a very heavy AI engineer for years, and then I started getting more on the sales side and working with C-suite individuals at a variety of companies. And the way I broke it down to them was that you run an office, you have somebody filing your papers, you have somebody maybe making calls or doing appointments. He gave a great example when it came to Booking or Airbnb. But now what AI agents can now do is that you can program this maybe in Python in a more so parallel process, right? So how does that help us? It's saving you time, so that way you can dedicate more time. So when you convert that time, you can convert that time more into financial monetary value, because when you're saving time, you're saving money, and you can resort those efforts to a more friendlier base as well.
Yeah. Do you want to add anything else onto that? I mean, great elaboration from Prince. Yeah.
Hello. First of all, super glad to be here. A lot of cool people here. I think they did a great job at really talking about what agentic AI is. Obviously, if I was going to break it down, is AI that can, first of all, vet data and can observe its environment, can make decisions on its own, right? So it's not basically just algorithmic decisions, but like based off of the data it was fed, it can break a very complex problem into much simpler problems and decide itself just like a human would, and based off of those decisions, essentially perform tasks. And the tasks could be in any vertical, right? It could be booking, like you said, it could be in HR, it could be customer service, it could be just, actually, it's not only performing tasks, but it's also like the right part of it where it can make very complex decisions by breaking simpler decisions. So yeah, just wanted to add to that.
Thank you so much. I guess the second question that maybe will be interesting as a follow-up to some of these tasks we're seeing the agentic AI things can do is considering that many Africans are relying on non-premium smartphones that don't have AI accelerators for on-device inferencing and often depend on cloud-based AI, and it also comes with high data costs and latency, especially in the reserved and remote areas. In what ways can we ensure that these AI advancements, because there are so many, I mean, to get a personal agent to do all my running around sounds amazing, but if I have a phone that cannot support the capabilities of those tasks, what are we doing to make it more accessible? And I can go to Solomon first, yeah.
So I think some of the consideration when you're trying to make applications for a place like Africa where people don't have a lot of data, you have to think of how can this person still continue executing the AI or the task that they want to execute without necessarily having to either connect to a network or without having to invest in a very expensive device. And some of the approaches that I know people have been doing have been to figure out how can we make smaller models that can be executed on device. I think, for example, if you have heard of, I believe there is something like Gamma, Gemini Gamma. There is also, from Facebook, there is Llama. And I think one other approach I saw that was very helpful was if you're trying to create an AI system based on these models, you can try to figure out things like pruning, right? Just take out the things that you don't need, or the weights or tokens. Think of tokens as letters, words, or things that represent a very small part of what it is that you're trying to say, or you're trying to communicate, or the model is trying to understand. You can prune that. And I think one good example I found was there's a person who was doing a startup in TZ, and they're trying to create an LLM that's based in Swahili. And they were explaining to me that they used the Gamma model, and they pruned it from, I believe, 9 billion parameters to about 500 million parameters, right? That drastically reduces, because if you're creating something for Swahili, then don't necessarily need tokens for English, right? So those are some of the aspects that you can use. And there's still other type of things that you can do, like federated learning, where things are executed on device, but then you only send very minimal data to the server.
And I just want to remain on you for a minute. You guys are doing like groundbreaking research on areas like reinforcement learning and language models. How are you seeing that work be able to be translated to these areas where it's needed in Africa? How are you guys planning to bring all that healthy research down back home? Yeah.
So there are several things that we're trying to do. One is from a very high level, we're trying to make sure we do this on a more generalized way, right? Because you have to start with some way of trying to make sure we have quality and then try to globalize it. And then after it works, then we try to localize that, right? So if, for example, we would start with an English model and then we try to figure out like how do we spread that to like other languages, for example, right? And then besides that, I think one of the things I saw is like development of something like the Tensor chip. This is very specific to like the Google Pixels, which is the Google Android phones. But then the idea is how can you try to accelerate or at least try to push the phone being made to be able to execute these type of things and just not use the normal conventional like computing or try to make chips that are used for AI-specific tasks, right? Because that way you, one, you offload the amount of like processing that would happen on a conventional processor, and two, it also becomes cheaper for your energy, like for, let's say, your batteries, for the communication. So those are some of the approaches that I can remember.
Oh, fantastic. I see Adebayo wants to speak. I also had some questions for you as an entrepreneur in this space. Go for it.
Yeah. So I think, thankfully, the big guys are actually already thinking about this actively, right? There's active talks with OpenAI, for example, and Samsung on how they can kind of enable AI capabilities locally by embedding lighter versions of, LLM in devices. So, that's great, right? But I think just entrepreneurs building apps that are going to be used in local devices can also find ways to, maybe fine-tune and prone to much lighter versions. Especially with just data that are relevant to their value proposition and whatever their app is doing, just so that, that round trip to cloud APIs to get data is much less, and then people in rural areas that don't have access to quality internet can have access to it. So I think it's great that, the big guys are already thinking about it and actively finding partnerships to have these AI capabilities in devices. But I think as entrepreneurs, now that we know that, these things are going to be in our everyday lives and going to help with a lot of process improvements, we definitely have to think of how we can proactively build software with that kind of mindset, right? That there's going to be people that don't have like extremely fast internet that would leverage your services. So, yeah.
And staying just on you, how are you as an entrepreneur navigating the challenges of trying to develop AI solutions that can compete with some of these larger companies?
Yeah, I think I kind of have a weird, different view on it. I think that for the bigger guys that have a lot of money, they also have like a lot of, it's actually like much more risk for them to just roll out AI capabilities within their platforms because it has to work really well. If not, they could actually lose customers. So I think there's actually an advantage for entrepreneurs that have smaller size companies and have users that understand that they're startup and are more tolerant with their journeys, to be able to think about smart ways to not overdo it, because I think sometimes as well, people just like to just use this AI thing as the buzzword and try to use it everywhere. I think there has to be a systematic way in which you can actually think of how you can deploy AI capabilities in actually improving workflows within your software, right? Or your SaaS platform or whatever it is you're building. So I think, and the way I think about it is, for example, I can talk about Lobby AI, right? We think about how can we improve customer experience, for example, right? How can we gather data and understand a little bit more how our users are using our platform? How can we deploy it in things that are conventionally harder to do? For example, our applicant tracking system, right? Machine learning, ATSs have always been a thing that, I think that was probably the first application of machine learning and AI where people match resumes of candidates with job descriptions based off of skill. But now we can do a little bit more deeper matching with AI. We also have ways that we can help people find talent. So just a little bit of background, my startup, Lobby AI, just helps connect African talent to global opportunities, right? So very focused on US companies in Canada and Europe, finding the right talent for their projects. But just like that platform that would help them to not only find the right person, but also all the cross-cutting concerns in the journey of, acquiring a talent, right? How do you onboard them? How do you pay them? How do you, even after you hire them, monitor performance and all of that. So we've deployed it in these various stages, but very thoughtfully in a way that it actually improves the workflow, if that makes sense.
I mean, thank you so much. That's quite insightful. And I want to move now from the startup world to now the big corporate. We have Microsoft here, who's doing a lot of work on agentic AI. And specifically for you, Prince, I want to focus on how are you guys making AI accessible to everyone, and what's your vision for building the AI agentic platforms? Just picking up on where Adebayo left it here.
For sure, thank you. So Microsoft has created and supported open source AutoGen, right? So that framework, you can go look on it online. It has, it's a big repository of enhancements for a variety of different AI agents that are optimized for a lot of different use cases. We also have the Good Trust Foundation, which Microsoft is also supporting African startups and companies in terms of sectors such as agriculture and healthcare. And then lastly, data centers. Data centers are very important. So earlier, for one of the keynote speakers, I was excited to hear about the national data center here in Kenya. That's amazing. I want to see more of that. I'm actually working with people to bring more to my country in Ghana, and develop more of those type of infrastructures in Africa as a whole.
Oh, fantastic, and thank you so much for that. And now coming to you, Eric, your work as an AI researcher is offering a lot of global perspective on the field. How can research institutions in Africa position themselves as key contributors to the AI advancements? Maybe let us know.
Thank you. So as Anne said, I'm currently doing a postdoctoral research fellowship at Harvard University, where I'm researching the balance between extracting maximum benefit from artificial intelligence, efficiency, speed, accuracy, things you've seen benefits of in, automated transportation, self-driving cars, healthcare, education. Those are the benefits. We all know them, right? And then mitigating the harms, because the harms are like real and current risks like disinformation, misinformation, bias, and potentially much more serious harms in the future. So that's what my research is, trying to strike this balance between extracting the benefits while mitigating the harms. My area specifically is when AI is used in markets. So markets means pricing, e-commerce. So I've researched electricity markets, for example, which use AI for battery storage optimization, e-commerce platforms, and how to mitigate collusion on such platforms, as well as in lending algorithms, where we try and encourage fairness and recourse for folks that are classified negatively by such systems. So just stepping back, before I did the PhD, I was working for IBM Research here in Kenya. So my experience is from those two perspectives on the value of research institutions in fostering AI development on the continent. The first thing I can say is, just looking at mature markets, there would be no, Lambda or Gemini or ChatGPT without research institutions. AI, so to speak, was born in the 50s and 60s before the winter came from research institutions, for example, Bletchley Park in the UK, and institutions like UC Berkeley and MIT in the 50s and 60s. And there was this long winter before hardware could catch up with people's ideas. And then the resurgence in the last 10, 15 years is also being I want to say, driven by research institutions. So why are research institutions valuable in this endeavor? Number one is they do foundational research, right? Without the pressure of quarter-on-quarter profits, right? Without relieving researchers from that pressure, we can't really do foundational research because they need to be de-risked from these short timelines. The second advantage of research institutions, and this is what we can borrow in Africa, maybe from the perspective of government supporting them, as well as private enterprises supporting research institutions, is that they really foster talent development. Not just, education in class, the way you might get at the University of Nairobi's informatics department, but having, undergraduates, for example, do research projects, master's students, PhD students. So talent development is the second key, right? In addition to foundational research. But even more interesting for folks in this room is collaboration between research institutions and companies, right? Where you have collaborations where research that's developed by the institutes gets either licensed out or some sort of collaboration, so that if you're an entrepreneur, you can use that research to go and actually deploy in a product, on the market. So that's how I think the value of research institutions can make an impact in Africa. For example, there would be no Google if it wasn't for Stanford research, right? Just to give an example. So what we learn on the continent is to encourage, the big players, whether they're global or local, to invest in research institutions, as well as for government, really, because without the support of, for example, the US federal government or the UK government, a lot of the innovations that, private sector now enjoys will not be created. So,
yeah. Fantastic, yeah. I see Prince wants to contribute, and then Adebayo. Yeah.
I just wanted to add on to what he said. The research is so critical, right? Because it's the basis of the whole foundation. And when people say AI is a new thing, it's been around for such a long time, right? So it's more so the execution on a larger scale is the new thing you're experiencing. And I know a lot of us here represent big companies, but I want to also challenge everyone in the audience, especially the younger generation. Utilize your creativity, right? Sam Altman with ChatGPT, right? He didn't come with Google or Facebook. It was a research group, right? That scaled, right, through Y Combinator. Mark Cuban, there's a TikTok video. Mark Cuban, he talked about if he was to go back when he was 24 years old, what business would he do now? He would do the implementation and consulting of AI applications in everyday markets. So. Outside of Microsoft, I do have my own tech startup called the Promoter App. We're doing the after party for this, but it's an event ticketing platform, right? And I remember Jim from Tech Connect Africa called me. She was like, "Prince, you're in Houston, Texas. We're selling tickets for this event, and it's showing USD conversion." So I utilized. I went in my GitHub repo, and I was able to code a conversion via automated AI, depending on wherever you're at, to see that currency reflect depending on your location, so you can utilize it. But what I'm trying to get at is that creativity in every single market. I have a younger brother in med school. He's doing cancer rotations right now, and now he's trying to create his own startup to kind of help newly married couples see what are the risks you might have in the future, right, with children, right? What are diseases that might come? So there's so much endless opportunities we can do here, especially in the education sector. So I just want to mention that it's very important as time goes on, because AI will be a huge factor, a huge role, pivotal to this generation.
And I think that's quite a great contribution on that. Adebayo, do you want to add anything to that? Or can we move to maybe what metrics should people look at to measure the success of implementing AI, given that now they're deploying so many resources, they're throwing resources at AI. What are they going to use to measure success or return of investment? Anyone on the panel can take it up. Let's start with Adebayo.
Yeah, so a couple points. Just wanted to reinforce the whole research thing. Even the outburst of Gen AI was a research paper by 6 Google engineers, and that's how everything just blew up in the last couple of years. So extremely very important. But talking about like how we as Africans can participate in this whole, this whole boom, right? And we often talk about like how we can use AI on products, but there's also like a really, really big opportunity with, we're talking about agentic AI, for example. The demand for agent engineers has exponentially grown over the last couple of months, right? How do we empower our edtech startups or entrepreneurs to upskill people that are maybe already in tech but have a different skill set? Because demand for technology is going to also shift as well, right? And also talking about the talent space, sheep and outsource agent engineers and people that are going to build the next batch of AI agents for global companies to be out of Africa, right? So as much as we talk about product and deploying AI to product, how do we also participate in the service side of things? And I think there's a huge opportunity in that space. So back to your question.
Yes.
So I mean, there's obviously the conventional frameworks we use to measure metrics, right? So obviously establishments, small, large, can set up goals, right? OKRs on how do we use our AI adoption to help with customer experience. How do we use it to operationalize a lot of things that was big spend for our companies? How do we use it to understand consumer sentiments, right? How people are essentially using our products, and obviously piggyback on that to make right decisions that could reduce costs, increase revenue, and the likes. And obviously set KPIs on obviously after after half or a quarter or a year, how has all these improvements we've done with our service or product using AI translated into, again, reducing the costs, helping out with employee experiences, helping out with increased revenue and the likes, right? So it's really just like having these metrics and tracking them over time and seeing how this data changes as you roll out your strategy, your AI strategy.
All right, yeah. Thank you so much. I mean, OKRs, reduced metrics, tracking employee experience. Solomon, what do you want to add on that?
I think there's also a necessity to reframe the problem. I think a lot of times people try to jump on the hype. And I think the most useful technology is usually like problem-driven, right? Start from a problem, define what the problem is, and then try to figure out like whatever technology you think it is, even if it's AI, can you think like, does this actually solve the problem that you want? Starting with that, and the problem does not necessarily have to be financial, or it doesn't have to be like customer engagement. It could be just something helpful in the world, right? Think, for example, a good example I've had is something like the transcription, right? Like when you're trying to watch a movie, but you don't have like hearing capability, just being able to read what's going on, like that's very helpful, and you might not be able to quantify that in terms of like, oh, this is how much it costs me to have this type of solution. So maybe reframing the problem and trying to think of like the value, that would be helpful.
Oh, fantastic. It wouldn't be right for me to end this conversation here without talking about public AI, because a lot of the AI is being built in private institutions, but we have to think about AI for common good and public good. And so with this in mind, to any of the panelists before we open up the last 5 minutes to the audience, when we think about public AI, how can we ensure that the development of public AI remains transparent and accountable to the public, rather than it being dominated by private interests? A lot of you represent private interests, so maybe you can give us some of your sentiments on that topic. Yeah, anyone can go first. Yeah.
I think one concept that correlates with that very efficiently would be ethical AI and the development of transparency and full visibility when it comes to data acquirement. So basically, whatever you have in your large language model and the data that is the LLM is trained upon, making sure there's visibility and transparency on that margin or that regards, and then in regards to ethical AI, making sure it is fair and very regulated. And I know a major part of that is when government policy does try to take a stand against that, or company monopolization, might want to get a counterpart, but making sure it is both fair on both statures.
Yeah, so usually when I think about like public AI, I think like three things. Like you said, I think the ethics part of it is probably one of the strongest things you want to think about, right? But it's also like inclusion. There's also how do we represent everybody, right? How do we have it contextual? And there's also like technical oversight. How do you how do like government bodies and policymakers work with people like you and you to make sure that they're thinking about using AI for good in a way that is also relevant locally. And I think that that's something that it's not an easy question, because usually working with governments it's usually very, very slow, just generally. Yeah. So I'm also curious to see how that's gonna even in the US I think it's there's a lag with government catching up with how to regulate AI just generally, and I can imagine that it's probably even more of a challenge locally. But I think entrepreneurs and people that are actively using it as we learn, because a lot of these things are still new. A lot of people are still trying to figure out a lot of these things. Yeah. But I think it's just hoping that entrepreneurs are going to be responsible with the way that they use, for example, data, right? How do you make sure that when you collect data, you're doing it in a way that you're basically doing user consent? And then using people's data the way it's not supposed to be used. How do we have policies around collection of data, sharing of data, and even using data to train, for example, open source models like Llama Tree and stuff like that, right? Just in a way that doesn't cause upheaval, in the next couple. And I mean,
before I go to Eric, I want to say something that struck me in a conversation last week is when we are building these large language models, we're saying Africa doesn't have enough data because we haven't put a lot of our data out there to be translated into the LLMs. But those communities where we're going to collect their data from, how are they reaping from the spoils of the profits of the people who are now building these amazing LLMs that are being used to build big things? So when I think about AI for public good, I'm thinking, how can we include those communities to also then benefit back? Yeah. But now to Eric and to Solomon, before, we definitely need at least one question from the crowd. So what do you guys think on public AI?
I think I'll just bring it back to the title of this panel, which is Beyond the Hype. And to just maybe a word of caution. There are things that require hype and things that don't require hype. So for example, if you're like a young university graduate studying computer science and you want a job, online, remote, whatever, do what Adebayo is saying. Get those skills for agentic engineering, get that job. But I'll try and speak. But I think because of our weaker base in foundational AI on the continent, right? We don't have huge research institutions. We don't yet have the huge data centers. I hope the government is going to do what should be done. I want to exercise caution in jumping from one hype wave to another, right? Before we just understand Gen AI, we're not talking about agentic AI. Next year is going to be something else, right? But we need to have university undergraduates and master's students understanding basic statistics, right? Which is the root of ML. And then machine learning, it can be good old supervised learning, decision trees, right? It can be logistic regression. Some unsupervised learning, understand what neural networks are, because they've been around for a long time, believe me, decades, right? And then NLP has been around for 20, 30 years' time. And then LLMs, came, into the public attention 3 years ago. But we don't have to work on LLMs. We don't have to work on Gen AI. We don't have to work on agentic AI. There's a lot we can solve for our continent, right? With basic AI, right? Basic machine learning, right? So there are things we should, be hyped about and pay attention to them. But there are things, for example, as communities, as government, we should be deliberate. And I don't want to say slow, but methodical about building the talent and the foundation so that in future we're not just adopting Gemini or Lambda or whatever is coming out from the West, but we're building those things organically, locally. As an example, I think agriculture, is the biggest economic, area of our country, and there's huge room there, for example, for AI to intervene. But folks that are in Silicon Valley will not think about, some of the problems we have here, right? Hence why, for example, we should be more foundational, more deliberate about, shaping, for example, our own universities so that whatever wave comes is not because we are jumping on it from outside, but we are actually creating that wave ourselves.
So I like where he started from. We need to have participants, right? Because a lot of times we sit away from the table and then we expect things should work for us. One thing we should do is like empower our youth. Because I think one thing that Africa has, it has a very big population of youth, right? And the problem we always have is when you look at the jobs, when we're talking about the tech jobs in Africa, right? They're usually like what? Data entry, trying to train. That's why we had like the DW scandal of where they were saying Kenyans are being exploited. Well, that's one way to start. We should start thinking of like, how do we take more active roles in trying to train the people that we have? That's one. And two, the other thing we need to think of is collective bargaining, right? When you're talking of something like the US is a very big superpower. China is a very big superpower. But like when you're trying to argue for our sake, and you're only arguing as Kenya, most companies think of it like, oh, this is 50 million people, right? But when you're arguing as Africa, it's like, this is 1 billion people, right? So we should argue collectively that this is what we want.
All right. Sorry, we got to cut each other. We're going to take 2 brief questions, please. So we have one there, and we have the lady behind the So if you can keep it as brief as possible and borrow 2 minutes from the next panel, I really appreciate it.
Okay. So my name is Shoji, and we are building like AI data analyst. So my question is for DeepMind guy. I don't remember the name. Sorry, I'm not good as AI. So like as token cost is same for every country who is using. So if I'm using it from like Kenya, India, or like US, token cost is same. So how this ecosystem of cost effective will be like for all the countries? So for example, building marketing agent in US can be good, but building marketing agent in Kenya might be not like that cost effective. So how this will evolve over the time, or it will be like those low income countries will be like 5 year or 10 year behind these guys? My second question is, one more question. Okay. Yeah. So, as like all the LLMs are building, so LLMs have already like started building their like own agents. So for example, Claude have built their computer use, or like OpenAI have released their like code editor. So will there be in future that these LLMs will build like all kind of agents, and that will replace the other markets like for other kind of agents?
Thank you so much. Final question from the lady behind Dr. Jane. She's right here. Can I give you my microphone? And then, Solomon, you can be preparing, as you can maybe start answering.
Hi, my name is Nzisa Kilu, and I am the founder of Clutch Foundry. We are trying to build the next AI and deep tech hub here in Nairobi. And one of the things that comes up a lot, so I work with a lot of startups already who are in AI. The high cost of compute is really a huge barrier. I'm interested to hear what strategies we can implement, maybe compute pools, SLMs, what else you have an idea about? How can we, like for example, our AI hub, create like a resource that can actually continue to catalyze adoption?
All right, so quick answers, and then we can say thank you. Thank you. So one to you, and I guess maybe to Prince.
So for the modeling issue, I think we have to understand that LLMs are very new technology. And so the way we try to approach this is like trying to make like the model work well globally, because at least that's a good place to start. And then the next part becomes like, how do you refine this to work well for a specific niche of people, right? Some ways of doing this, of course, is like the training. You can try to train it depending on different places. Other thing I can think of is like, instead of trying to think of like one model, I think one thing that's starting to come up is like multiple models, right? You it's becoming very hard to like actually rely on just one model. And so who knows, maybe in the future we'll just be having like different models working for different places. So that would be one way of like helping that. And hopefully the cost would only be like in the after model training, just refinement. I think the last thing is that if you're trying to think of like a model for like yourself or like for the smaller tech startup that are around here, that's easier to refine because I think this is a globalization versus localization problem. If you can figure out to train for more localized solution, then that would be a very good way to cater for the local market.
And then everything doesn't have to be trained. Like there's technologies that you can use to augment foundational models and LLMs, like RAG and stuff, where you can adopt your custom data with an LLM and make it actually make decisions based off of whatever vertical, whatever niche you have, right? So obviously, there's many ways around it. There's function call. There's many things you can do without having to like spend a lot of money. I think the most important thing is you should be solving local problems, right? You should be solving problems that are relevant to, if you're in Kenya, whatever the problems it is you're solving, it shouldn't be a US problem. It should be a Kenyan problem, right? That can actually like help with whoever your like, I guess, ICP or is. So.
And now to Prince to answer the question on making the cost of compute more accessible.
So I think you answered one of the questions, right? You mentioned smaller language models, right? You know, and it does have its limitations when it comes to that regard. But I actually get this question a lot because now when I'm working with a lot of these execs, they're asking me, hey, Prince, this is expensive. How can we make this more suitable for my company, right? So there are some strategies that Microsoft utilizes a lot. And instead of getting your own provisional throughput unit via computing, right, maybe what I propose, right, and it works for their infrastructure, is a pay-as-you-go for a digital computing infrastructure. And we have some documentation I can share to you after the panel, so that way you can leverage it within your business to kind of meet your needs. But that is what a lot of companies across the board are going to. Now, there has its optimization periods, but as your company begins to scale, then you can probably go towards your whole PTU or, you know, a better computing infrastructure. Hope that helps.
Fantastic. And finally, our generous moderator has given us an extra question, and there's a gentleman there who had been raising his hand. Keep it short so we can...
Yes, my name is Firebricks, founder and the CEO of AfriStech. A major question that keeps coming to me in the discussion, I think some people raised it, developing AI tools in Silicon Valley, primarily it's used to improve productivity, efficiency, and you see companies that are really taking advantage of that. In Africa, the biggest problem we have is employment of youth. That, to me, I think most people will agree. If you look at the informal sector, it's really the pyramid. If you look at the West, it's the reverse. So how do we use AI to actually create jobs as opposed to siphon jobs from Africa to the West? I think the key point here is, what do we need to do with AI that can help to create jobs and move people into the middle class? Thank you.
Who wants to take it? Adebayo, you're the most suitable.
Yeah, so that's a really great question, and that's kind of like, you know, what my startup primarily does. There's, you know, multiple things that I can think about around how obviously we can use AI to create jobs. I don't know that it's the AI that would create the jobs more so than just exposing you know, our talent to opportunities not only locally but globally as well, and obviously using AI to augment that whole connection, right? So, for example, when you look at platforms like DL and Replaying, right, that have exponentially grown over the last 5 years, and that's because obviously after COVID, more and more companies are open to having global and distributed teams, right? So they would obviously try to save cost and go to India or go to, you know, Eastern Europe. And now I think Africa is also becoming a destination, and hopefully that grows. So I think when you think about the way companies globally hire, it's like they obviously need platforms that would enable them to, one, find the right talents for their open roles, right? Two, how do you deal with hiring someone that is far shore, we call it, right? That is 4,000 miles away, but still having them being productive in the context of your own company. How do you think about all things like send them legal documents, NDAs, intellectual property documents, offer letters. But even ultimately, after you hire them, how do you make sure you pay them? And how do you make sure, just so many things, right? Monitor performance. How do you make sure you are compliant, right? So companies are doing employee of record, where they come and establish a local presence in the different markets. And just wrap it up. So bringing AI to the workflow, right? Finding talent is a good application where we could use AI, right? There's products out there that you can basically just make an arbitrary search and get a very good match, very, very much better than the conventional applicant matching, ATS matching that everybody's used to. There's other things like helping talents with good resumes that will make them attractive. And AI is something that can be deployed to that, right? Making them write resumes that would make them attractive to companies globally and locally. But also things like interviewing and all of that, right? So one of the things that our platform also does is basically bridge all those gaps and then deploying AI in different places. How do you find people? How do you make sure that you pay them? How do you make sure that you also enhance the workflow and the entire journey? So yeah, I hope I answered the question.
Just to complement what you said, and I think that's a key question. My thoughts are to think more long term, and I think a really big play is going to be education.
Yeah.
Not just like short term, get your job now because you've graduated from university, but I think AI is going and should be, steered by the people in this room to really drive our education towards job creation in future. So one thing I can think about, for example, is as we have more growth in multimodal, multilingual artificial intelligence, then we will have a really huge opportunity to deploy education, for example, from elementary school to secondary school to a lot more people than currently have access to it, in a way that then we can prepare them for the jobs of the future. So I think deliberate effort, for example, by government to deploy AI so that, for example, people learn skills in the language that they best understand, over time, so that then they become more employable or have skills in future that they can work locally or outside the country, is one really important play. So I think AI, for example, can revolutionize our education so that, for example, you have customized learning, adaptive learning, bigger reach, for example, if there are classes that don't have enough teachers, if we have, for example, on-device learning, on-device educational modules on affordable smartphones or other such devices, I think really we can revolutionize employment long-term, but with a big play on education short-term and tactically.
So guys, I know we have so much more to
point.
say. Can I push them to talk to us at the tea break? I mean, moving beyond the hype, as you can see, we have so much more to say. I don't know, you still want to, or can they come to you at the tea
5
break?
seconds.
5 seconds.
Yeah, there's actually also really, again, back to my point around enabling our, the human capital development, right? There is even short-term wins that we can do to participate in this AI workforce, right? How do we, now there's a lot of edtech platforms doing, UIX training, I don't know, how do we train them to do data annotation? This is not something that needs 5 years or 10 years. You could actually, a couple weeks, right? How do you make them have engineers that are software engineers and probably know a primary language and have them be agent engineers? You can do that in 3 months, right, with the right programs. So there's a lot of things you can do even in the short term to actually make us, as a continent, participate in AI globally. And I think that's something to take seriously.
All right, Solomon has something burning, so a few seconds, please. But guys, this is how exciting moving beyond the hype is. So come find us during all the breaks. Solomon, wrap it up for us. Thank you so much.
So I think one thing we need to understand is that change is inevitable. This has already gotten out, so this will happen. One thing you need to understand is that I think this is one of the most cliche statements I've had, but it's actually true. AI will not take your job. Someone using AI will take your job, right? So the question is, how do you get ahead to take that role? And then the last thing is, with AI, there will be more data, there'll be more junk, and there'll still be more quality data. So the question becomes like, who are these people who will help us organize all this information? That's it.
Well said. That was us moving beyond the hype. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you so much. We will be. Do people want to have like a